We will do the Pledge of Allegiance and then I'll read our statement. Member Schilling, will you do the honors again for us? Let me change my background. Sorry. So we do have a flag. We'll do the pledge and then everybody else, if they can mute. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Member Schilling, and thank you for being a veteran. All right, our verbiage for the night. Good evening. We greatly appreciate our staff, council, and residents adapting to our teleconference format due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Tonight's meeting will be held under Minnesota State Statute 13D.021 that permits a public body to hold a meeting via telephone or other electronic means due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For members of the public, the meeting is being live streamed on the City of Wyoming YouTube page. The Wyoming City Council meeting work session will be recorded as part of the public record. After each agenda item is read and staff gives a report on the agenda item, I will call upon each council member individually if they have any questions on that particular item. If there is a need for a motion, we ask that you make a motion or second a motion by please stating your name first. All votes on all items will be completed by a roll call to meet the standards for State Statute 13D.021. All right, agenda would be new business, which is number 1, to continue discussion regarding financial impact of facilities and street CIP in relation to the city's long-term plan. Mr. Linwood, are you starting with this or is it going to be Ms. McCann?
I'll start, Mayor. I think we're actually going to start with, as we continue the discussion on this, the council did receive an updated long-term plan that's been updated to indicate the closing statements from our 2020 audit. So that has been updated with those new financials. That you can see that has changed, obviously, with ending balance, year-end balances, that there has some changes been provided in that document. Tonight, I think what we're going to do is we're going to start with Mr. Luce and Ms. Stein from Wold Architecture. They're going to update the council. In the packet, they did provide the council, per the direction of our last work session, some design standard costs, or excuse me, design costs. Mr. Luce, maybe you can correct me on the appropriate terminology on that, but Mr. Luce is going to have a presentation to kind of walk the council through where we're at right now as we evaluate those recommendations and what steps we would want to move forward if the council so that was their desire. So Mr. Luce, with that, did you want to start?
Yeah, just Mayor and Council want to appreciate the continuation of trying to learn what the best approach is for your facilities. I think based on our previous conversations and just topics of conversation I've had with Rob, we wanted to kind of provide a little bit more insight into what next steps might look like. So that initiated us to send sort of we'll call it our draft proposal letter, which obviously that's just for discussion today, not for any contemplation or formal action. But I think I want to just walk through kind of where we've been and where we're going here if things continue. So I'll share kind of a brief presentation, and some of it might look familiar actually. If you recall, we interviewed for your original City Hall project, maybe the better part of, maybe a year and a half ago, and had started that effort. But I think some of the discussion at that point, and maybe you learned a little bit about what our design process and efforts look like are, Wold is a firm that has a long-standing history of municipal clients in Minnesota. And our philosophy has always been fixed fee approach that means no surprises. And so in that letter, you'll see that approach is consistent throughout. And those fee percentages, if anybody talked to any of our other clients and some of our references, they would find that we've been consistent across the board with how we've approached that. So that's just sort of a lead in on the letter that you received. But I kind of want to go backwards a little bit and talk a little bit about, what we've seen before and where we landed and what you might see next. So that next piece would be kind of an overview of our design process, which again, you might have some recollection of what we talked about in our previous proposal when we were first hired. And then talk about kind of a projected schedule for the short-term recommendations, what the core group or groups might look like as a part of that. So sort of how staff might be involved as we move forward, and then any sort of public engagement that we might want to discuss as well. So obviously our master plan took us through these kind of 7 steps, and we're at that sort of gaining approvals standpoint. And that means looking at your long-term financial plan. And it also means that you would want to take the next steps into design process so you can realize your visions after the real needs of the facilities have been established. And that short-term recommendation, if you recall, came out to a total project cost of just over 18 million for these 3 separate projects. There are some long-term needs that are still out there that, and maybe even some midterm needs that we would continue to discuss and work with the city on sort of timeline. But I think tonight's focus is going to be on the short-term recommendations for these 3 facilities. So just if you recall the diagrammatically what those recommendations look like, it's a new public safety facility, so inclusive of police and fire on the site, kind of just across from the existing city hall. And then we would have, this is kind of showing the short and long-term view of City Hall. Initially, we would propose a small addition to sort of address some of the security and accessibility issues, as well as some renovations within to tackle those restrooms and maybe reorganize staff a little bit better so that they can function more appropriately and have better separation between public and staff. And then Public Works really looking at that existing site and sort of expanding operations so they can really centralize and get what they need for really the next 20, 30 plus years and more accurately and appropriately serve the city of Wyoming as a whole. So with that, I'll kind of go into the next steps piece of it. When we engage on a design process, we really break that down into a few different phases. The first one is schematic design, then design development, then construction documents, where we're really creating the set of drawings and specifications that a contractor would bid on. And then we help with that bidding process. And then ultimately construction or contract administration is where we're involved throughout the process as a party to the city that helps ensure that the awarded contractor really follows through on what we've conveyed on the drawings is the intent of the city to bring those facilities to realization. And then just some other options that I think I discussed it in our proposal letter, but want to mention it again here, that there are some additional design pieces that would be in play, and that may or may not be something that Wold would do, but we can certainly provide that service. So that would be furniture design and then equipment design, which really equipment design these days means mostly AV and technology design. So those are sort of optional additional services, I'll say, that we can continue to discuss if things move forward. I think the percentages I have here really represent what the breakdown for our fee would be and how we would project that effort would be allocated for each of those phases. And the percentages here are really industry standard. So the American Institute of Architects has a set of documents and contractual documents that have already been, I think, reviewed by the city. And these particular percentages are really in alignment with what a typical design process is. I realize I'm outside and I don't know if the sound of the rain gets too loud. Please let me know. But I want to then go down and kind of probably lay out what each of these design phases would look like. And then we can talk about kind of maybe next steps in terms of how to move forward with design in sort of an approval process way. So before I go any further in breaking this down a little bit further, are there any questions or comments?
All right, so council members, if you want to just raise your hand and then state your name if you do have any questions right now, it'll just be probably quicker.
Linda Nanker-Yeager has a question. And the question is, on a project like this, what does furniture design and equipment design and equipping and actually equipping the buildings with furniture and whatnot? I mean, does it all have to be bought new? What's this going to cost on top of the 18 million?
Yeah, I want to restate that the project cost, that 18 million, actually covers everything. So that's an all-inclusive project budget. The only thing and the part of that budget that Wold doesn't necessarily know is if there's any sort of financing or bond issuance cost that would be a part of that. And I think Jean can speak to that a little bit more clearly. But really, the furniture and equipment is already in that project cost. So that's already in there. That doesn't mean that through that sort of design process, you wouldn't project to maybe potentially save some money by reusing some of the existing things that you've already invested in. And certainly that would be a way to bring it back down from that 18 million, but it's all inclusive with the furniture and equipment.
Okay, so you assume all new.
Yep.
Okay.
Member Schilling? You're muted.
I was going to have Jean answer Jonathan's questions first because he called on her and I didn't want to interrupt on
Oh,
the
sure.
bonding or
Sorry.
the financing.
Yeah, I can't see everybody's screen or picture. Sorry, Jean.
Oh, good evening. The bonding costs associated with the construction of the facilities has already been included within the long-term plan. As we were putting the long-term plan together, we did reach out to the financial advisor to ensure we'd have the appropriate dollar amounts accounted for.
All right, thank you. Member Schilling?
It was just kind of to piggyback off of Linda's comment. If I'm not mistaken, the furniture design, the equipment design, I know is built in, but don't you guys put an allowance price on that? And that's something we can remove or do on our own, correct?
Yeah, so the project soft costs really cover the design and implementation and costs of those items. So our kind of fee percentages that you've got before you today really are focused on the building construction design. The furniture and equipment piece are kind of standalone soft costs that, yes, you could decide how you would want to move forward with that. Certainly it's a service we can provide, but we have a lot of clients that, either A, do that on their own or find specific vendors or consultants that they've already worked with and have established relationships with.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, if there isn't anybody else, we'll go ahead and move forward. Thank you.
Yep. So I think I'll spend a little bit more time on the schematic design piece. I think it's important that the council and everybody else kind of understand exactly what that looks like and what kind of different tasks we would be accomplishing as a part of that, especially as the city considers how to move forward. It wouldn't be abnormal for us to only have approval through each of these phases individually. So it'll be more clear when I show you what the potential schedule is, but certainly we would say if the financial piece of it isn't fully baked yet, but we want to continue forward, we could say, let's just start with schematic design, and whether you approve the whole design fee or just schematic design, we're going to move forward into that phase anyway. But what that would look like is really establishing project goals and requirements. We have to look back at the needs that were established as a part of the master plan and revalidate those and make sure that there aren't any other staffing changes or potential projections in terms of population or anything like that that might factor into really what the needs of the facilities are. And once we have that, we're really going to be illustrating kind of the initial concepts of design. So, right now, the public safety facility just shows up diagrammatically as a couple of, squares or rectangles on the site. Certainly we would actually start to show how adjacencies of different space work together, and maybe what the shape of a facility might look like, and how we might want to position it on that site, with definitely the help of WSB, looking at some of the site forces in terms of the sun angles and things like that, really start to come together with not just what would function the best, but aesthetically what is kind of the city of Wyoming looking for. And so that's where those kind of initial concepts and discussion will start to come into play. And then from a more kind of logistical standpoint, we would be looking at really city zoning and code requirements to make sure that whatever we're presenting and however we're moving forward meet all of those requirements. And so those are examples such as the height of the facility, the amount of impervious surface that you have within that zoning, and setbacks and things like that. And again, we would be doing this in concert with WSB. The next piece is really estimating the cost. So once we kind of get towards the end of schematic design, we're going to look back at all of those decisions that were made as a part of that early process and say, okay, how does this inform the initial cost per square foot that we originally came up with? And we can really dial a little bit closer in on what the actual construction cost is going to be. It's still kind of at a higher level because we can't do a room by room or material or labor takeoff of the building. But it will give us a sense of sort of what materials might be used, what the size of the actual facility is, maybe what some of the site costs and things like that are, and how that would come into play with the overall cost. So all of those things would help inform what that actual updated schematic design cost estimate is. What you would see is really a more detailed site plan, floor plans that would have actual spaces shown and their sizes, and start to look at the which ones need to be next to each other. We do some initial sections and elevations, and then more often than not, we've started doing some renderings, whether that's exterior or interior. It really gives the owner an idea of how that building massing might work on that specific site. So really starts to give a sense of is that the right shape for the building, and how high is it in relation to some of the other surrounding structures and things like that. Once those costs are all estimated and we have all of those kind of that content, we really put that into a final SD book. And so that schematic design book really marks a point in time where we say, this is all the information we found. This is the estimate that we associate with the needs that were presented. And at that point, it would be, essentially presented to the council for approval to accept what was found, and then contemplate moving forward with that next phase of design. Now, I used the public safety facility as an example, but all these parts and pieces and discussion topics and what we would be finding would really be relevant for each of the three projects. So with that, maybe I'll just stop here and find out if there's any other questions about kind of what schematic design looks like, and if there's any other questions about that process.
So, Mr. Luce, this is Mayor Iverson. My only concern is you go through this, you've given us a number already, that 18 point whatever million. Will this work out to that 18 point something million? Will it go over it? Will it come under that? I mean, how much is there wiggle room in there? Because I definitely don't want to ever see us go over the amount, right? So how close do you normally get to the amount you gave us, or can we come under that? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that is a focal point of really our project team from the get-go, is we know that, this isn't a developer project or something like this. we work with only public sector clients. And so we totally understand the need for having a fixed number and not going above that. And so what we typically see is that even if some of our early estimates are starting to come up a little bit higher, that's when we really start those discussions on, okay, what do we need to do to make sure that we're at or below that 18 million. So again, that is a strong focus of ours throughout the process. And the numbers that we're using at the beginning here, I think really give us latitude to meet the needs of the city. But also it will mean that there might be some tough decisions along the way, because we'll find that maybe there wasn't something that was originally thought about, but it would balance out, and we would have those discussions throughout this process to be sure that it's at or below that number. Now, the other thing I'll say is that if there's a very formal stopping point at schematic design, sometimes there's discussion about whether the budget is a lot higher or a lot lower. And sometimes that might inform an adjustment to our fee basis. But most of the time, what we find is that we're setting that fixed fee on the budget that we've got, and we're going to move forward with design, and it's not going to go up or down regardless.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep.
If there's another council member with questions, please just raise your hand and unmute and ask your question. I'll give you about 30 seconds. All right. It looks like we're good, Mr. Luce.
Okay. I'll go on and maybe I'll kind of more briefly go through the next phases, but I'll at least give you an idea of what those would look like if we were to move past schematic design. That next phase would be design development. That's about 20% of the overall effort that we have. That would really start to bake in some of the infrastructure that we'd be looking at. So that's the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, really dialing in on the site design, maybe some landscaping things as well. So all of those details from all of our consultant really start to bake into the shape and size of the facility that was approved as a part of schematic design. You would definitely see more specific layouts for rooms, and we would have the actual sizes set for that. And I think probably the most important piece of our design development process is really our user group process. And that's outside of what we would call our core planning group, where we would probably establish kind of what we'll call the decision makers for each of the three projects that have kind of the high level decision makers that present to potentially a facilities committee and ultimately make recommendations up to the council. But that user group level is really where we take every individual room and we sit down with the people that are actually going to use those spaces, and we figure out how they're going to operate in those spaces and where are they going to sit and where do they need an electrical outlet. And like a conference room, for example, how many people are going to be in there? What is actually that room going to be used for, and how big should the monitor be, and where would that be placed? So there's a level of detail there that we get down into that not just for office space, which is kind of the example I was giving, but even more critical spaces that would be used by police, fire, public works folks that have critical equipment and critical operations that they have to follow. It's super important that we're looking at exactly how they're going to use those spaces, because any hiccup in that process, or if that space isn't fully functional for those people, it can definitely take away from their critical operations. So I think that user group process really marks probably the most important thing about design development. But then outside of that, certainly we're building in more details all along the way. So start to look more closely at what actual materials would be used as a part of the building. We start to get into some of the wall sections, like how is this building going to be actually constructed, and what costs are associated with that, then help build a more detailed cost estimate at the tail end of that design development phase. And again, we would have a design development book that would have that next layer of detail, the updated estimate that would be presented to council for that approval process at that time. So that's kind of a sweep of what design development looks like. And then for construction documents, It's not to say that we're not still engaged with the city, but this is where our engineers, our architects, all of our consultants really have, their nose to the grindstone, and we're putting together some very detailed drawings and specifications that we can hand to a contractor so they know exactly what the intent is of the drawings. So that's where we go from a design development book that might be, 20 some pages to, 50, 100 plus drawings from every one of our consultants that would really help all the contractors understand exactly how to build a building. The other part of that sometimes is involved with construction documents is really looking at sort of any sort of phasing implications. Oftentimes, and in the case of City Hall or Public Works, there are existing facilities and people within those. And so how can we manage those construction pieces and the people that still have, regular day jobs in the city that have to function? What do we have to do from a construction standpoint to make sure we're working around those things so that we're not taking away from the day-to-day operations of the city and making sure that you're still there for the community that you serve? So again, at the tail end of that construction documents phase, we have that very detailed set of drawings and specifications that we essentially are ready to hand out to any potential contractors that might bid on the open market. So city would typically follow that public bid process, and we would seek approval from the council at that point to issue those drawings and ultimately go through that bidding process, which is about 5%. So it's a smaller portion of the overall design fee, but it's one of the most critical pieces. That's where we've had all of our estimates. We've figured out as much as we can from a material takeoff standpoint, using not just our own efforts, but we hire a consultant. We hire Loeffler Construction to help us with those estimates. So we have kind of an outside entity that's helping us inform those estimates through DD and CDs as well. But really, this is when the rubber meets the road. We've got drawings, we issue it out for bid, and all these contractors are going to have a million questions. And so that process really is addressing all of those questions, making sure we're issuing any sort of clarifications. Another critical piece of that is making sure that we're contacting potential contractors. If we just issue the project and nobody knows about it, that would be a pretty big failure, I think, on bid day, because we would probably see very few people show up. So we really take that sort of marketing the project to heart and make sure that we're contacting not just a general contractor, but we're talking to electrical contractors, HVAC contractors, anybody out in the industry, and especially anybody that maybe has previous working relationship with the city, to make sure that you've got some local people that might be interested in the project, have a heads up that this thing is coming. So, it's with that low bid process, we can't really give preferential treatment to those local contractors, but what we can do is make them aware of the project ahead of time so that they're on top of it, and we can kind of help guide them through that bidding process. So once we have, generally speaking, it's going to be about a month process for that bid period from when we issue drawings to when we actually accept bids. At the point that those bids are accepted, there would be a review process to make sure that those numbers are vetted and the contractor is confident in their bid. We would have probably discussions with the city to ensure that it's still meeting the budget and we've hit the mark. And then ultimately that's presenting a recommendation to the council to award that project to, 1, 2, 3, whatever number of contractors there are, based on how you might, what construction procurement method you might use. So that's that design process. And then CA, that's where we're really helping support the contractor, but making sure that we're an advocate to the city so that, the design that you paid for and the building that you want ultimately is what you get at the end of the day. And so that's our responsibility, is to work directly with the, construction team and the city to really find that we can build from those drawings up to an actual building that's everything that the city expected. Of course, there's multiple site visits from our team. We don't have on-site presence every day, but we do hold regular construction meetings, and all of our consultants would continue to observe the site and be out there to ensure that the intent of the drawings and specifications is met. So that's what that's the whole design process through construction administration. I have some notes just on what that furniture and equipment design piece would look like. I don't know that I necessarily need to spend a whole lot of time here, but the process is very similar, where we're really extracting what the needs of the city are and making sure that we can find a competitive way to obtain that equipment and furniture.
All right, thank you. I do have a question, Mr. Luce, and I think you alluded to the fact that you'll be working with WSB for some of this, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so our city is very comfortable with Mr. Erickson, and he's on all the street projects, and just know that things are taken care of. And he's here all the time. I can't see Mark on my screen, but he's here all the time with the road projects, right? And so we're comfortable with that. Our staff knows that they can go to Mr. Erickson. Actually, I think our city residents know that as well. He knows them. So will you be giving us that same service? I know that you said that you're not on site every day, but we always know that we can get a hold of Mr. Erickson on a street project, and he's right on it. So that's what we're used to. Is that something that we would get with your company as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think just to add to that too, I'm actually in Forest Lake, and so the drive up to Wyoming is pretty quick for me. And having some stake in kind of the northern area here and being interested in the projects, I myself would probably make more regular visits just along the way. But anytime there's an architectural issue, an engineering issue, anything like that, our staff will be on site and make sure that the contractor's not waiting for answers.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from council members? Again, I can't see everybody, so please just raise your hand and then state your name if there is. Okay, not hearing any of that, we can continue.
Okay. So I have kind of just a really broad draft schedule here that doesn't have a ton of detail. It just kind of shows that there's that kind of start and stop. Whether the whole design fee is approved or you're just contemplating that initial SD, really we're going to have that approval process along the way regardless. And so we're looking at just over about a year of design. And what I've kind of built into here a little bit is that we may end up actually staggering the three projects. And so they might be bid separately. Now, if they all were going to move forward simultaneously, we could likely bring this down to more of a 12-month design process. But I'm just building in some allowance for that length of time that's needed for schematic design to really understand all of these, potential building projects that we've talked about. But also if there's some adjustments on those three individual projects along the way, we foresee that might stretch out a little bit further. But regardless, the budgets that we've established and the estimates that we've looked at really contemplate a mid-2023 construction period. And so we would foresee that you'd probably be looking at an 18 to 24 month time frame for construction. That's being conservative, but that's where you'd have those buildings be ready in sometime towards the end of 23, early 24.
And you have adjusted for those costs then, because I know we've looked at the square footage, right? We've already had kind of those initial talks about 2021, 22, 23, 24, whatever. So if we do spread it out, then you've already put in plans for what the added cost would be as we all know, it's going up really quickly, right?
Yep. So we have accounted for roughly 4% inflation per year. And I think you've seen that in some of our previous presentations. And that's pretty industry standard for construction. But that pinpoints a midpoint of construction is sort of the typical way that we would estimate. And our estimates are also targeting the middle of the pack on bid day. And so our hope and what we typically see is that the low bid comes in below that number and you're still able to maintain some contingency, but it does project that there's some material and labor increases that would happen throughout the course of construction. And that's how bidders would typically bid it, is not just what the costs are that day, but they have to build in what their increases in costs might be throughout the course of construction as well. So the numbers right now are reflective of that mid 23 construction timeline. And if something was shifted, I would say 6 months away or a year from there, we would probably want to readdress what that $18 million number is.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I'll move on. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, any other questions from council? It doesn't look that way, so go ahead.
I wanted to kind of finish out the conversation with some of the engagement pieces that we've talked about. You've seen us work with the city and staff pretty closely throughout this master planning process. And we would say that that's really a very similar process that we would take in design. With these 3 projects, we would establish likely 3 separate core planning groups. And so we would foresee that for public safety, that the chief would really lead that core planning group, but likely still have Rob involved and maybe other potential managers or supervisors from public safety be a part of that core planning group. So we typically see about 4 to 6 people that are part of that core planning group that are really helping us set the baseline for decisions on the facility and what needs to be done. And oftentimes it's, they're doing some of the hard work of making tough decisions about the budget and what spaces actually are needed and what those sizes are. But then they're also the conduit back to council. So as we talked about finishing up each of those design phases, it's not just Wold kind of presenting what we found. It's really in concert with that core planning group, and they're really taking ownership of those decisions and where each of those phases land at the tail end of those. What you would see on those other core planning groups then, of course, would be, some heavy involvement from Chuck and his group on public works, and then Rob and Kelly and maybe some other folks that would be a part of that City Hall project. Oftentimes, you'll see from the diagram, there is a lot of input. And so we talked about that user group process before, where we're making sure that that's an inclusive process to have staff give us input and talk directly to that core planning group about what they want and then what they need, really. And then also we see other input givers as well. So there's likely input from council along the way, not just at those specific points where we need approval to start or stop individual phases, but likely work sessions a lot like this, where we'll be walking the council through some of those decisions, and the core planning group can help convey that information even outside of some of those work session meetings to individuals and staff as well along the way. So I think what that builds up is just that really solid ownership of the facility and the design itself. We see ourselves as not just the designers, but really as sort of almost like teachers, where you really become a part of that design process, and you're learning how to do that as we are bringing our expertise and understanding of these building types. You're giving us the feedback and providing the information that's needed to really make it the City of Wyoming's projects and buildings that are going to last and are going to be meeting the needs for the city for the long term. So that's that kind of core planning group process. And then outside of that, I think we've taken a number of different approaches on how to engage the public. I think the best process, or maybe the most common practice, is that when we find those points in time in our design process where we're going to council and there is a public meeting, at that same point in time, we would typically have like an open house where citizens can come in and understand the project a little bit more, ask questions of the core planning group or ourselves as the designers, just so they have a deeper understanding of what's involved in the project and how it might impact them from a community standpoint. Not only would we do that potentially at those ends of each phases of design, sometimes with community spaces like a council chambers, or if there's some sort of community room within the public safety facility, there might be some key individuals within the city that you might want some feedback from. So maybe groups that tend to use your facilities a lot. Oftentimes we'll see sort of VFWs or something like that that might rent out spaces. We'll provide that opportunity to make sure we're getting input from those folks as well, so that it's not just buildings for the staff of the city, but really buildings that are useful for the entire community at large. That is really essentially the kind of tail end of the conversation. I think I've given you kind of the idea of what each of these phases look like, and then just a soft touch, at least, on what the engagement process looks like. And I can certainly get into more detail if needed, or answer any questions and sort of talk about what might be next here.
Okay, so actually on this one, I'm just going to ask each council member just briefly individually here. So I'm going to start with Member Luger. Do you have any questions going forward? Anything that was just discussed regarding public engagement, discussion, or anything before then?
I guess I'm just wondering, and I might have missed this, kind of how you envision the timeline of public engagement. Is that concurrent with, or at what step in the process do we get that going? Because I do think it's going to be a critical aspect to the plan. So I'm just wondering, do we start that like at what point?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that's something that's really, I would say, kind of customized to each community and to see what works for them. Once we kind of organize ourselves around those core planning groups, we'll have discussions with those individual groups about, what sort of community feedback would be necessary. And we can start it right away, or we can talk about a strategy of making sure that we're really developing the needs and having a more solid amount of information before we're presenting that to the public. So oftentimes it helps to make sure that some of the solutions and ideas are a little bit more fully baked before we're getting that feedback. But that's where I'm saying certainly we would see those kind of open houses happen at least at those stages in the change in the design phase. But we have seen it where there's been earlier feedback as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Member Onstad.
Yes, I see public engagement as being very critical to involving the stakeholders, the public, in this project. How do you plan to get engagement and encourage that kind of engagement from the public?
Yeah, I think that really starts with people that know the community. And so, if there's council members or staff that know people in the city that have interest in understanding what the building is about and what kind of feedback is needed, we talk about not just the groups of people, but individuals that might want to have some say in that process. And oftentimes in an open house, we can put together renderings and other things like that really help convey kind of the concepts out to the community at large. And so that often looks like, sitting in maybe the council chambers and having a more formal, or at least I would say maybe even more informal presentation where we're there for some questions and feedback. And then also, having a strong presence on the website and making sure that there's project updates along the way and there's specific links that community members can go to look at kind of, okay, I remember them talking about this project, where are we at? And so we can continue to provide the city with updated content for that website, so that folks can go there and they don't have to show up at a meeting, but they can at least see what's being presented and kind of where things are at in terms of the timeline and design process.
All right. Thank you. I know I'm a huge proponent of us getting out in the community and not them always coming to City Hall. So meeting in different locations, but
Absolutely.
all right. Next would be Member Yeager.
I'm more concerned about your fees. When do I see $800,000 worth of fees. When do they get paid? What do I have to give you up front to do this?
Yeah, so there's no sort of upfront cost or retainer. We just bill monthly. So those sort of costs are billed out at that percentage for each phase, and typically we're kind of spreading it out evenly throughout that phase. But oftentimes there's sort of peaks and valleys in the effort. Typically at the beginning of schematic design, when we're just doing some of that organizational things, the cost would be a little bit less for the first month or two, but then it starts to those percentages start to go up. But really, you're always marking those bills out by our progress. And while we also contractually have an obligation to bring your project in on budget, you also can stop the project at any given time. And so if at any point during this process something changes, and we've been there, we've been through this, the city says there's this other thing that happened and I don't even know what it would be, but we've got to stop right now, or maybe we need to put the project on hold. Our billing really would stop at the end of that month, and we would really only bill up to kind of services rendered, I would say.
So then the next question is probably more for Mr. Linwood and our finance people. Where is the money going to come from for the billing, for this upfront billing are we going to bond immediately and draw off of that, or do we have a fund someplace for this?
That would be a council discussion. I don't think, based on, unless council directed us to move forward with bonding on the projects, I would think that we'd want to move forward with our, the public engagement, things like that. But an example, if it was something tonight where the council wanted to move forward or look towards taking action perhaps on the schematics, that would be what the buildings would look like. Something that we could use our capital revolving fund for, and then down the line when we do that actual bonding, we could reimburse ourselves for the funds that we were to take out if we were to do a component of this. There's different options, but you could go right through it and go straight to bonding too. I don't know if I haven't really heard that from the entirety of the council, that we'd more piece this together and go through the processes, but there's different options.
Okay, thank you.
If I could speak to that for just a moment. I wouldn't recommend jumping right into the bonding, because you of course have specific spend down rules once you do issue a bond. And so I guess my recommendation would be you utilize a different funding source for these upfront costs. You pass a reimbursement resolution at the time you're paying for the costs. So then you can legitimately have yourself reimbursed for the costs at the time the bond is issued. And this would be the same thing if you had other types of costs related to the facilities themselves prior to the issuance of bonds.
Is there an estimate of how much we're going to incur in costs before the issuance of bonds?
Well, I think that would be up to the steps that the council's comfortable with moving forward. I think Mr. Luce broke down some of those costs as based on the percentage of those design costs within the presentation. Like I had stated, I know that and I don't want to speak for Mr. Lewis, but most likely that next step would be the schematic design of those facilities, and that would probably kick off your public engagement component, but that's a council decision. But that would, I would think, be the start of this, Mr. Lewis.
Yep. So that's a good statement.
I was just looking for an estimate to make sure we had enough in the capital revolving fund.
Do you know the total cost on that schematic component for the facilities, Mr. Luce?
Yeah, so I kind of broke it down by facility. If we just looked at approving that initial kind of 15% for each and taking into account our max estimate on reimbursables, we're just a hair over 81,000 for the public safety facility. We're at just over 12,000 for City Hall, and then around 34,000 for the Public Works Center. So I can try to do the math on that quick.
So just over 105, 110,000.
27.
Yeah, about little over 127.
Okay.
That's all the questions I had.
All right. Thank you. And we'll go to Member Schilling, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. My thought process on this is I kind of agree with the previous comments. The one thing I will say from just previous experience with projects, my recommendation is move forward with designs, because you have to show people something before you do any type of public engagement. Based on what we've published on social media or that's in the paper, we're looking at $18 million for 4 colored boxes. That doesn't show people anything. Not only that, is we still need some type of design. We need something to look at to give us that idea. And as Mr. Linwood said, I was asking about this as well, was, what fund would that come out of? And that is that capital revolving, and then we can reimburse ourselves through that. But the public engagement, I think we do what's, basically an open house once we have some type of renderings of what each building would look like. So I think that's more productive in my mind, because now you have a product that you're actually showing the public or the taxpayers. So that's kind of my opinion on that. I feel we need to move forward on that, but I'll leave it at that right now.
Okay, thank you. And my only question actually is more of a finance question. So hopefully Ms. McGann can follow what I'm going to ask or can answer this question. So if we build this in quote unquote phases, so not everything all at one time, are we going to bond, because you made the reference about payments having to go out a certain amount. So would we look at bonding for the whole entire $18 million? Or if we're not going to build it all at one time or in different years, do we have to bond that out? And then I worry about inflation and that kind of stuff that's going on, right? So I would think, giving the state of economy and stuff, is it better to bond sooner rather than later and bond for it all? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
It makes perfect sense what you're asking. Currently, we have the larger, $13 million project being bonded for in 2023, and then the remaining 2 smaller projects being bonded for in 2025. Now, the reason for that is we're looking at impact to the community, number one. We do have the 2009 bond that will fall off. In the last year for that is 2025 for that. So that secondary bond, it doesn't have such a large impact. If we were to do all 18+ million at one shot, the impact to the community would be probably more than what anybody wants to bite off. Even at the 13 million, you have, for the median home, you have about a 20% increase in that first year. But then after that, that'd be in 24, but then in 2025, that increase based on all our projections goes down to 1.3%.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I just wasn't sure how, interest rates and all that kind of stuff that we have to pay and stuff and how that looks. So that's what I was kind of worried about. So awesome. All right. So from there, everybody has asked their questions. Unless somebody had something else that came off of the questions that we just talked about. Doesn't look like there are. All right, Mr. Luce, is there more you'd like to discuss with us from your presentation?
I don't think so. I think that kind of covers, I guess, the scope of what we'd be looking at. And again, like like Rob said, I think the next step would be for really the city to decide if they want to move forward with that schematic design process.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Mr. Linwood, do you want to kind of go from here, or do you want some more discussion from council? Do you have anything to add to that?
I think the only thing, I think Mr. Luce, as he indicated, with the council, obviously it's a work session. This is just, discussion at this point, but it is the, I guess, direction from the council. Are you looking, would you like to have that schematic design proposal from Wold? Then that could be something that the council could take action on at a future council meeting as we go through this process. Is that, I guess, from a staff standpoint, the direction that we'd be looking for if you want to move forward on this?
Okay, Member Schilling, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, can we move forward with that and get it on an upcoming council agenda so we can discuss it? Because I like to keep things going, because these things take forever, and we have up until the end, and we could stop at any point during this process as well. But I would like to keep things moving forward. I mean, we've ignored it for 30 years. We can't keep ignoring it. So.
All right, let's do this. Member Lugar, your thoughts?
I agree. I don't want to lose momentum on this. I think it's important. And given that we have input every step along the way, I think it doesn't hurt to start the process and continue it.
All right, Member Onstad?
I would have to agree.
Okay. Member Yeager?
I would be remiss if I didn't suggest, when we have $800,000 in design fees, whether we should get a competing quote for this.
Is Mr. Luce still on? Is he still available?
Yep.
So you heard that question. Is that something that is usual per se? Or, I mean, how does that work? If
I'll speak to it, I guess, a little bit. I mean, it's purely up to the discretion of the council and staff recommendations. We have done it both ways, where we've gone through a master planning process, and the value that we've brought through that has allowed us to continue into design. We've also worked with other municipalities and counties that say, we're just going to do this master plan, and then we're going to go back out and see if there's other folks that want to give a different look to the design and the process moving forward. I think I'll let others speak to whether they feel they're comfortable moving forward with Wold or not, but we've seen it kind of both ways.
Okay, Member Schilling, I'm going to ask you this question because of what you do in your day job. So, and you've had a lot of experience with this. I'm also going to ask Mr. Linwood. He's probably talked to a lot of cities as well. With the amount of money that it is, and to Member Yeager's comment, is this something that your city would do? How do you feel comfortable? You guys are going through this, right? So.
Yep. I'm actually comfortable with it just because of my past workings and projects that we've done. And again, we always have the fail-safe for the stop button in our hand, but keeping the momentum forward, we come up with a design concept. We have our public engagement. Yes, fees can be high, as Linda had stated. It's about 800,000. But if we look at it in an overall picture, I mean, this is basically from start to finish from Wold. This is a 2+ year project, and it's a small percentage of 18 million to do design, run, go, take care of all these things. So in past fees and things and projects I've done, I'm comfortable with the amount. But I do know also that if we didn't like and want them to run the project, we could also do that. We could bid it out as well. My comfort level is with Wold at this point, because I've worked with them in the past, and they've never done anything wrong as far as I've seen on any of the projects that I've overseen. So I'm comfortable with it. But I mean, all of this looks like a very large number to all of us. This is something that's never been done in this city, and it's been ignored forever. And of course, it's going to be a shock and awe in every phase and aspect of this project. So, but we're so so early in the stages, we haven't even begun to get to that point yet where I have questions on how much fees are going to be from start to finish yet. It is presented, but I don't worry about it at this point because I look at the percentage and it doesn't surprise me.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Luce, and I would say as somebody who's been in sales and marketing for a long time, my question is this: are your fees set in stone? Any negotiation in that?
I'll just respond and say that our fees are commensurate with, I think, our efforts typically, and that's I think been a core value of our business is maintaining a fixed fee percentage. Obviously, I think if you look at the letter, we're making sure to give you credit back on kind of some of our efforts that have already been there, but we would never want to lose a client or a project because you felt like the costs were too high. So it can be discussed. I think it would be valuable for maybe a further discussion with Rob to, understand what they've seen from some of our other clients and talk to some of our references and say, this is the percentage that we've used. It's pretty been kind of our standard for, the 50 plus years that we've been in business. And this is what we believe it takes to really do the best job for the city. So I'm not saying no, but I'm saying this is what we feel is going to give you the best product in the end.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So this is what I just want to kind of bring back into focus because we are live. It is going to be, it's recorded as well. And I think what's really important that we have not recapped why we're going through this right now. I think Member Schilling has done a really good job saying it's been 30 years, and it has. It's been a really long time. I just want to give just a little bit of knowledge, and it will just take a quick second here. So City Hall was built in 1978. So that's a long time. The population for when City Hall was built in the city of Wyoming was 1,559 people. Okay, so and at that time too, township was 2312. So we've come a long ways. We're at like 8,000 people. Township building was built in 1975. Public Works building was built in 1979. The township had 1,262 people in 1970. And the reason why I bring that up is because that building is what was in that merger, right? The city had 695 people in 1970, 695 people, 1,500 in 1980. The merger in 2008, the township population was 3,390. The city population was 3,550. So in 2008, we had 6,940 people. We are now up again over to 8,000 people. So we're growing, right? And having buildings this old, we're running into ADA compliant issues. We're running into our public safety building not having what they need. So we've come to this now. Our council has come to this now after 30 something years, and it's been put off. So these are hard decisions for all of us, and to take the leadership on this. So I applaud all of us. Or how many meetings have we had? If anybody can bring that up. I think we're on the 4th or 5th meeting on this. I'm almost pretty sure it's 5 that we've had on this and looking at this, and we're gonna have a lot more questions, but by no means are we taking this lightly. And by all means, if this council doesn't take action, what I'm afraid of is as I live here for another 20 or 30 years and a next council decides to do it or whatever, it's gonna be twice as much. So my thought on this is I would like to bring this forward as well to the next council meeting. I actually will go on the record saying I would like to see the schematics on this. I believe that it's up to all of us as council members to make sure that we're out in the public and showing them all the exact same thing and all the exact same figures. So, so they can be well informed. So I don't know if anybody's staggered by those numbers in terms of how long those buildings have been around, but I know I was. So, all right, Mr. Linwood, I believe that you have that direction then for the next council meeting for the schematics, correct?
Yep, that's what we needed. Thank you.
All right. Are we on now do we want to go to number 2, or are we going to have
I think we're going to continue discussion in regards to the facilities, and I think this kind of ties together, dovetails with that long-term plan. The next piece would be that long-term plan and our street facilities. There is an updated long-term plan, and at some point, we are going to ask the council to accept the long-term plan. Know that this is a living document, and it will be necessary to update it, but we have given multiple drafts to the council on this dating back to August of last year. And I think that we want to continue to move on that. So I think if there's any questions in that plan and how it relates to the facilities or potentially the streets, I know the streets conversation, I have some information for the council on our street improvement program, some of the funding options on that, but maybe we want to start now with that long-term plan if there's any questions there.
Okay, and just to thank Mr. Luce for the presentation and making it very easy to understand. So really appreciate that. And I know we'll be seeing you again.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, I know some of us are having some connectivity issues. I know I'm having some, Member Schilling is having some as well. So I don't know about our other local council members here having that same issue. But if you see any of us go off camera, it's more because of that. So just to let everybody know that.
Mayor,
right.
it seemed, Mayor, I just wanted to add, I am still here. I did turn it off and it seems to have helped because I kept freezing and kept missing comments. So I'm going to hang here with this off for a bit and see if it helps.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, Mr. Linwood, you want to start again?
I think the next step, Ms. McCann, would you want to start, would you want to go into the long-term plan, or do you want to do the streets component first and then do the long-term plan last?
I think it'd be beneficial to look at the long-term plan for just a couple of minutes and then go into the street component and then address questions that council members may have.
Okay, sounds good.
Are you okay if I share my screen here?
Yes, please do so.
All right. Can you see the summary that I have, or the narrative that I have on the long-term plan on the screen here?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So as Mr. Linwood indicated earlier this evening, the long-term plan has been revised primarily because we do have the final 2020 audited financial statements completed. As we look over the key highlights, there are a couple additional modifications that I do want to point out that I caught after this presentation was sent out. So we will send you a revised summary document here as well. As we look at the key highlights, a couple changes. The third bullet point, the taxes levies is projected to increase 4.2 million to 6.6 million over the duration of the plan. And that is, the increase in the levy is due to general inflationary increases, as well as the 2003 bond issue and the 2005 bond issue. So what that does for the impact, and I'll show you the dollar amount impacts here in a moment, is that we have a difference in the rate from 43.89% in 2021 to 52.92% in 2025, with the biggest increase in a period of 1 year happening in 2024 because of that 2023 bond that is projected to be issued. And then on the last bullet point under the key highlights, the cash position is expected to decrease from 15.5 or 15.3 million down to 9.3 million in 2025. If we look at this schedule here, where we have the schedule of property tax levies and the tax rates, I'm going to try to point out here with my mouse the percentage change from prior years based on the median home. And if you look at this in 2022, we're anticipating about an 8.65% increase on the median home. 2023 at 5.55%. And when you get to 2024, this is when the property taxes are collected on the 2023 bond issue. And so we do have a 20% increase there. So if you look at the dollar amount, we go from $1,300 for the average median valued home to $1,574 in that 1 year. However, as we move into 2025, there's only about a 1.3% projected increase. Now, remember, we had talked last time, the 2009 bond, the last payment is, I believe, in 2025. And so that bond payment of a couple $100,000 drops off, and then it helps to offset some of the bond costs for the 2025 bond issue that'll first be levied in 2026. The only other point I wanted to make before I open it up for any questions that you have after Rob goes through, some street information, is when we look at all of the cash balances within every fund, we have a little trend indicator down here. And, to really take a look at, are there adequate reserve levels in each one of these funds? And at this time, you'll see that, we have all green lights going on here. And as I mentioned before, in the 2009 bond issue, we're showing a zero cash balance in 2025 because that bond will be fully paid for. After that payment is made, there's no more money within that fund. Outside of that, I would, direct or hand it over to Mr. Linwood to walk through some of the street information.
Sure. Jean, is it all right if I share my screen? If you could stop for a second.
You got it.
Thank you. Apologize, just 1 second here. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can. Rob.
Yes.
Thank you. Just brief, and some of this will be review, and really at this, we've talked to the council about this a few times in regards to some of our street program funding. The city has continued to do a street improvement program, identifying a 5-year capital improvement plan that we've prioritized our streets by condition, age, utilities, etc. Projects that we've completed, this really identifies that we've been extremely proactive since 2014, where we've done 17.5 miles of our 68 streets. We also have a maintenance component of our streets that we've been trying to make sure that we take care of, especially the new that we have, to ensure that they last the duration of time they're supposed to. And that includes crack filling, street overlays, and sealing of our streets. We've done multiple things to really work on trying to harness and focus this program. In 2017, we implemented a cash flows analysis to see what our future CIP plan works and how our cash flow works with that, if we have enough money to do that. And then in 2020, we identified the long-term plan to take that a little bit further to really make sure that we can continue to do these street projects. You can see here some of the upcoming that the council has identified that this is the next 5 years of street CIP programs that are on their priority list. The thing that we have run into essentially is in 2013, the city council established a street improvement fund that allocated $600,000 annually towards improvements in projects. these funds were used to pay for debt payments, other costs for street maintenance and projects that began in 2015. As we continue to do projects and actually to have more, to borrow for more of these projects, we've gobbled up that 600,000 to the point where not only is it paying for all of our existing debt, but we are having to levy more dollars to pay for our street projects, and it's not sustainable. So currently in that long-term plan, there is basically an assumption that of an implementation of franchise fees and three months of revenue included, and that projects out to that 290,000. We did talk about earlier that for our maintenance component, that really after Mr. Elmsfeld went through that, it's closer to 177,000 that we need to make sure that we're maintaining our streets appropriately every year. And then Ms. McCann has identified to really go through those franchise fees that a property tax levy for that same amount of dollars at 290,000 is you're looking at about a property increase of 22 of $73 based on using those franchise fees for a residential customer at 63. Looking at these, there are some things to take in consideration. The general levy, there is some pros, levied against all classes of property. It can be tax deductible, but some of the cons, it's limited revenue diversification. It can increase our tax rate more. It's a little progressive and large impact on commercial properties. The franchise fees, looking at that, some of the pros are it's a fee to the utility provider and a use of public right of way. We have diversification of our revenue. It's flat free, not progressive. Relatively easy to implement, and then but some of the cons are it's viewed as another tax, and then we have to do a little bit of coordination with Excel and with Connexus to do that, and it's going to raise a utility costs on residents and businesses' bills. We've provided this info to the council, but just to go through this again, Excel Energy is giving us a table that basically would show what these fees would be on a customer's monthly bill. They have to be applied equally by all of our energy providers. And all the calculations for both Connexus and Excel in our city for both gas and utility are in that. Fee collection would not begin until we would give Excel notice and go through a proper set of resolutions for 90 days after if the council did determine to use this process. You can see right now, based on the long-term plan, that we would be looking at, if we did implement franchise fees, that option B of 290,000, where you can see a residential customer monthly, that would be a $3.75 on electric and $1.50 on gas for that residential component if we were to proceed with that based on that long-term plan. Next steps tonight that we're asking the council, we've talked about this before and council has gave some feedback, but we're getting to a point where we need to make some decisions on this and how we want to proceed. There's different mechanisms. We can continue to utilize levy dollars. We can completely, as the recommendation is, utilize franchise fees. You can do a combination. One question is for the council, as we do this, if we were to move towards the use of franchise fees, we want to make sure that we have public participation on this. We want to make sure that we communicate this on our website, on our social media, that this is potentially coming, and even maybe have open houses to talk about the franchise fees and exactly how it works, and that the fees would be going strictly to streets. I think that's something that's always really important. Different cities use them for different projects. So that would be something that's really key. We can prepare any of these items for the council at any future meeting, but tonight I'm going to really ask the council for direction on this if we want to proceed with looking at these franchise fees as recommended in that long-term plan, or if we want to evaluate other options, because like I said, at some point we need to make a decision one way or the other, how we want to proceed to make sure that we can fund these future projects and maintenance of our city streets. That's what I have. And then just, I guess at this point, any feedback from the council on this would be appreciated.
Mr. Linwood, can you go back to the slide that has the pros and cons, please?
Yes.
Okay, so when I look at this, I've talked to a lot of residents about this. I've, talked to my husband about it many times. We don't always see eye to eye on things. Couple of questions is I want to make perfectly clear that if we go with, we really have three options. One option is do nothing. right? And it's going to take forever to get our streets done. And as an example, I believe just that small road that we did for Fairview Hospital, I don't know how long that was. I mean, how long that road is, whatever, but it was about 500,000, almost $600,000 for that short amount of road, correct?
That's correct. I think right around a little over 500,000, I believe.
Okay, so when we look at our, right now, we are looking at our neighborhoods that are 20 and 30 years old that are falling apart, right? And we have a list. Thank you to Mr. Aljaz for having that list. It's going to take a long time if we do nothing to get to whether it's my road or name somebody's road, right? It's going to take a really long time if we do nothing. So we have to do something unless we're willing to tell our residents, sorry, you know, you're going to have to wait 10 or 15 years, correct? The one thing I want to point out is this: my hope is eventually, whatever we decide to do, I'm in favor for the franchise fees for many reasons. And one is that it's everybody, everybody will be paying this. It's not just certain people, but it's, you know, everybody who's in our city will need to pay for it. And it's monthly, which makes it it makes it a little bit easier to put in your monthly budget, right? Makes it a little bit easier. And my hope is this, and I've been saying this for a long time, my hope is this, is we get to a point where it's self-sustaining. And down the road that maybe we're never gonna have to, if we ever get to that point, to not have that 20% that the residents have to pay as well, right? So that's my look at how franchise fees can really work. But I don't know how long that will take to get to that self-sustaining part, right? So that's my only, probably my big thing on that is how long will it take? So, and I am in total agreement that we have to have residents understand how this works, and they have a say in either way on what they want to do. So with that, I'll be quiet with my opinion, and we will go to Member Onstad for any questions or comments.
The only comment that I have is that it's something that we're going to have to do at some point. Like you said, we have three options: do nothing, tax one way, or tax another way. And again, having participation with the residents to say, what do you want? I've heard a lot of people say that they want roads, but they want the magic money too. So we got to figure out where the money's going to come from and how it's going to look. That's the only comment.
All right, thank you. Member Yeager.
On the sheet we have, it says that franchise fees are collected in lieu of any other permit fees. So what has Excel and Connexus been paying in permit fees each year for the last 5 years?
Approximately, I'd have to look for 2020, but anywhere from $2,500 to $3,500 in permit fees a year for right-of-way permits.
Okay. And what would, I mean, you have different classifications: small CNI, non-demand, large CNI. What would churches, schools, city buildings be classified as under that criteria?
In regards to that, I believe that our city buildings, I believe churches and schools, I think it's based on size, Councilmember Yeager. Certainly as we go down this further, we could have Colette Jurek from Excel come, and she'd be able to identify that probably better than me. I don't want to necessarily misspeak on that to give you, because I think obviously the YM Elementary School is a much different user than a church. Well, unless I guess comparatively Maranatha, but there's a big difference between Maranatha and the Methodist Church. So there's really going to be what those clicks are. I would guess I'd want to get some feedback from Ms. Jurek on that, which I'm sure she'd be able to answer that question.
I'd also be interested in what the new buildings would be classified as, because you're looking at increased buildings. So would it be enough to, let's say, pick on City Hall, go from a commercial, a small to a large? But I love to see the answers to those questions first. But philosophically, I don't believe that. I believe franchise fees are basically hidden taxes and not transparent. I remember a resident coming in and saying, complaining about a hidden tax and being told, we do not do hidden taxes in Wyoming. So if it were me, I would levy it, because it would be, I find it more transparent. I find it would make the council more receptive or more aware of what they're levying. I also look at the example of Forest Lake, who did institute franchise fees, and now is, I read in the paper, is trying to get a local sales tax through, because to further pay for roads. Apparently a franchise fee wasn't enough, from what I was reading. Yeah, I think that's about it.
All right, thank you. Member Schilling, you're next.
Okay, trying to remember what everybody else had said. Let's start with this. We have to keep moving forward with the plans that we've set forth, because we do have to keep maintaining, reclaiming, redoing our roads and updating our infrastructure as things and times go by. I am also another person that's heard a lot of public input that, you know, they wish we would do more with our roads. I also have heard the term that it is a hidden tax, but I mean, if you're really honest, if you were to break down everything you pay a fee or a tax on, I mean, it's astronomical, but it's how things get done. I'm for the franchise fee just based on the feedback that I've gotten, and the numbers that I have shared, because it is dedicated solely to the road projects. The only concern I would have, and as Councilmember Yeager brought up, is, you know, do we want to do it as enough? Because when I look at it, I look at option A, B, C, and D. You know, I'm looking more at option D because of the end number, because I don't want to end up in that situation either, but I would like to move forward with this so it can in turn keep our long-term plan of road redevelopment infrastructure corrections moving forward without raising that levy. But there's a big difference, in my opinion, between raising the levy $4, what is that, 12 or $60 a year versus, you know, a little bit less than that to come close to what we're projecting. But I don't know. It's a tough decision, but we do have to keep moving forward with this in one way, shape, or another. But I do like this idea. And as far as my opinion is transparency, this becomes a line item on our budget, I would assume, Mr. Linwood, correct?
That is correct.
And in the name of transparency, if we, you know, the constituents that we have out there that are paying attention to these things and are watching these things, it is a line item that is called out. So in my opinion, it is very transparent. It's not in any way, shape, or form hiding anything, in my opinion. Now, I could be mistaken and other members could disagree with me, but I think it's a better way to go, because it's a dedicated fee, in my opinion, to a particular project and long-term plan. So.
All right, thank you. And that leaves Member Lugar.
So I agree. We got to fix the roads, and we do have things that, unfortunately, we have we have a lot of things to pay for. And so I do feel like, in terms of our infrastructure and amenities, there are investments that we need to make. I don't feel that franchise fees are necessarily hidden, but I absolutely think that they are less transparent than a levy increase. With a levy increase, through the process of finding a budget, however throughout that process, I feel like I think that seems to be more, and I don't think it's a you know, an exclusionary factor necessarily. I just feel like when we say to residents, here's what our levy increase is, I feel like that has traditionally been the message that has been taken away, right? Like that's what people look for. And again, not an exclusionary factor. And certainly that isn't to say that we can't change that with doing this. I guess my challenge, just philosophically with franchise fees is that because it's a flat fee, it impacts our different levels of income, home incomes disproportionately, right? So as I interpret it, somebody who is low income and really struggling is paying the same amount of somebody who this might be more affordable to. And I feel like the impact there is it's a different impact. So that when we have progressive increases, that's based on what people can afford. And so I guess my question, so that's, I guess, again, not completely opposed, but I do want to acknowledge, and that how I interpret this now is that this is likely to be more of a hardship to a certain segment of our residents than others. My question is this: if we don't move ahead with franchise fees, and we do instead, and we figured out we either do nothing or we bump the levy, can we quantify like what the cost benefit analysis is by doing this now? Again, instead of waiting and doing it a different way. Like, is there a benefit to doing this franchise fee now? And is it possible to say, okay, we have gotten really the painful part of getting our roads done, and it will be an ongoing process, arguably. But once we get like the big stuff that's gone under the radar for 30 years done, is there a possibility to have a sunset fee on that, or a sunset date on this? So I guess those are my two questions. Can we quantify the impact and the benefit to everybody paying the same flat rate now instead of one of the alternative methods? And if we get to a point, can we say, you know what, this maybe doesn't make as much sense as it did at one point when we had some really expensive projects ahead of us?
That's the valid questions, council member. And I think the one thing to know for council on these is with Excel and franchise fees, I do believe that you are, now the council has the ability to change the fees on an annual basis. So you do have that ability. But once you sign up for franchise fees, you are locked into them for, I believe, 20 years. So this would be something you'd be looking at for a duration of that time period. Like I said, you do have the ability on an annual basis to change the amounts, but once it's locked in for a year, it's locked in for a year. I think the questions, in regards to, that's why I brought up this slide. Based on that 290,000 right now, you're looking at, on a medium home, you're looking at that $73. And then an annual for residential on the franchise would be $63. So you can see the difference there, but that's on a medium value home. I think all valid points brought up by the council. I think from a staff standpoint, we just need at some point to make a determination what it is. And if it is franchise fees, then we need to do that sooner or later, just because there is a time component. And if we want, I think, to the council, how aggressive do we want to continue to be to fix the streets that we have? We've been extremely aggressive over the last 7 years, but we've essentially done a quarter of our streets during that time period. And there's a lot of streets out there still that are in very bad shape. And I think we all know this. And there's a lot of reconstruction. There's a lot of maintenance that needs to be done just on the existing to get them through. I know Mr. Olmsgeld can state that. He has crews pretty much every day of the week out pothole patching just because of the current conditions. So I think, all these different things, I think, good input from the council. I think at the end of the day, what are you direction from a staff standpoint? Are you looking at to add this into the levy? Are we interested in exploring the franchise fees more and getting some of those question answers about the larger users and how that would impact, whether it's City Hall, a school, a church? Some of those question answers. Do you want more information on this and to proceed one way or another?
I have another question. So, and I think that Member Luker's questions are very valid. My question would be this. So let's say we do put it into levy dollars. There gets to be times that members on council, whether it's now or down the future, is going to say we need to cut, we need to remove, we need to whatever. So if we lumped it all together and we increased the levy on the streets, what's not to say the next council will not say, no, we're now going to cut that all in half, right? So let's say I'm going to use easy math. Where are we at right now? We budget 600,000. So let's say it's 800,000. And the next council says, nope, we're going to have to drop that down to 400,000, right? If it's a franchise fee and it's locked in for 20 years, it's not going to be cut, right? It's safe from being cut unless if we have a line item, well, next councils could cut it anyways, correct, Mr. Linwood? I mean, at any point in time.
Yeah, but you could have it at the $5.25 a month, and then you could have, the council could look at it and say, you know what, this year we're going to put it down to $1.50. I mean, there is ability to change that, like I said, on an annual basis. So you can raise it if you wanted to.
Yeah, but if we put it in our levy, if we bond it, if we put it in our levy every year, a council could decide to drop that, right? Decrease how much we're levying for it every year, correct?
Correct. I mean, right. The levy adjustments can happen, right? If that was something that they didn't see, a different council didn't see value in the street fund or continuing to be aggressive with streets, correct? That could certainly be removed.
Okay, and then my other question would be this to validate what Member Yeager or Member Luker is saying is there is, I believe, help for people that are lower income. So is there a way that we can set aside some money if somebody is struggling with their utilities or whatever? I'm throwing that out there because I'm not sure. So if they are having a hardship with the $63, is there a way to be able to help them?
We don't have any programs, I guess, per se through the city for energy and gas. I know that Lakes and Pines is the local nonprofit that does do those energy evaluations, where they'll work with individuals if you meet the criteria of your income, and there is potential help on that. So I think it would just be a factor of the actual resident and what criteria they meet. We don't have anything directly through the city, and I don't believe the Chisago County Health and Human Services did. It would be through that Lakes and Pines for Chisago County and for Wyoming residents.
Okay, thank you. Those were my questions on that. Are there any, okay, so what we really need to decide right now is what you're asking, Mr. Linwood, franchise fees or increase the levy, correct? And you need to know for the next meeting. That's where we're at.
I think we'd like some direction one way or the other. If there's more information that needs to be gathered in regards to the franchise fees, if that's not something you want us to look into further to proceed with, if we want to look at, changing that long-term plan and adding it to the levy, I think those are some of the questions that we need, correct?
Okay, so if everybody could unmute. So I think this is the best way to go. So I'm going to ask again. We just need to decide, right? And so majority is going to kind of go on this. So I'm going to go again. Claire, are you able to kind of make a decision based on the comments?
Absolutely interested in proceeding. I mean, in terms of comparisons and finding more information, for sure.
Okay, so on both, right? What you're saying is you would like more information on both. Okay, correct. So I've got you down as both. Okay, Brett, what are you at on this?
I'm kind of looking at the franchise fees. I don't think it's that terribly much money. And it generates a nice bit of change that could go towards roads for general improvements.
Okay, thank you. Dennis?
I'm actually fine moving forward with all the feedback that we've had at this point. I'd like to move forward looking at the franchise fees option.
All right, and Linda?
I would like the information, but I'm more into doing the levy.
Okay, and Claire, I need to know if you're one way or the other, leaning more towards one versus the other.
Well, I'd like more information on the franchise fees, if that's what you're asking.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, and I am more in the franchise fees as well. So Mr. Linwood, let's get more information on the franchise fees that were asked. Questions on, does that work on what you need?
Yep, that works. And we'll have something back to you very shortly on it. So thank you.
Okay, and then we'll also engage the public, correct?
We'll probably get the information council is asking on this, and then we'll ask if you want to proceed with the franchise fees, then to do that public component, because I think that's important through this. Is we've heard that we want to make sure that the public has an opportunity, if they're engaged, to know what the city may be looking at or doing with this.
Okay, perfect. And my suggestion on that is make sure that we're going to several different places and trying to engage public with it. So, okay, I know it's been a long meeting. We still have one more agenda item. Oh no, actually we have two, don't we?
Well, do you have any further questions on the long-term plan before we go off on that? Anything else?
I do have a question on it. Under the key highlights, oh, I gotta find it again. I saw other discrepancies, where we talk about back in was it April, we talked about the issuance of the second bulletproof was issuance of bonds, which seems to have dropped out in the latest one to a pay-as-you-go methodology. There's another one under recommendations. Determine the city's need for new municipal buildings and building improvements. They are not currently included in the plan, but in the tables, there is provision for bonding for that. So can those discrepancies be cleared up?
Yes, those discrepancies can absolutely be cleared up, and I can tell you exactly what happened is that when the final report was being formatted, I discovered as I walked in here that they grabbed the wrong document to pull in for the key assumptions because it was an older document. So I will get that corrected. You will have the appropriate version prior to the time that the council is asked to accept the long-term plan.
Okay, thank you.
All right. You got what you need, Mr. Linwood?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. And is Jean lucky enough to stay with us for the next hour, or is she? Just thought I'd ask Jean.
Happy to do so, but I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.
All right. Thanks so much. We appreciate your time.
Bye now.
Okay, so are we going to tackle number 2 on the agenda, the American Rescue Plan Act discussion? Is that what you'd like to do next, Mr. Linwood?
Yes, we can go through that really quick. I just have a brief, a very brief on that. We've received more information on this, and I have a brief presentation, and I do mean that, for the council to review on this. We've just gotten some more information as of yesterday. We talked about it today, this morning at staff, so I'm going to share my screen here. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. Just a little bit of the memo to go with the background, but for the council and for the public too. The American Rescue Plan was a COVID-19 stimulus plan of approximately 1.9 trillion economic stimulus, and that has recovery for states from 350 billion, municipalities, counties, tribes, territories, and then 130 billion for local governments to split. What we know so far that the funds will be released in 2 payments to local governments, with half following enactment and then half paid 12 months later. So we won't receive that second half for a year later. There'll be no minimum population threshold, but non-entitlement distributions will be capped at 75% of our city budget. That's not something based on the current allotment we have to worry about. The funds can be used to replace lost revenue. That is a big deal based on the CARES money. That was not an option. Funds can be transferred between jurisdictions or nonprofit partners. That may come up, and I'll explain that more in regards to our relationship with the county and other partners. And there is an expenditure deadline of December 31st, 2024 for these funds. Estimate of funds, council has seen this before. Right now, our estimate is approximately $918,000. That's still preliminary, and the Treasury and other entities was still saying use precaution. We believe the earliest still we would receive this money would be June 9th, 2021, and we're still waiting for guidance on that. The first half of the funds, this goes through as soon as 21. And then we would probably be looking at second half payments in May of 2022. Obviously, May 10th is passed. This was original guidance. But like I said, that's still at June 9th. Some of your larger entitlement cities, I should say, might receive that funding sooner than later, including entities like Chisago County. Eligible uses of funds. This is more a quicker breakdown of the memo that was provided to the council, but responding to the public health emergencies and costs associated with that, responding to the negative and economic impacts of the pandemic, loans or grants, essential worker pay, critical infrastructure, revenue replacement, investments in drinking water, sewer systems, broadband improvement, and staff time on COVID-19 economic impacts. Restrictions on these funds: they cannot offset tax reductions, they cannot use for economic development, we can't put it into a savings account. It will be necessary to do multiple reports on these funds, similar to the CARES Act funding, so that's something that staff will have to be aware of. Last time Ms. Dumas did a lot of the keeping track of these funds. And it will be necessary based on if we do receive over $750,000 to do a single audit that's required by the federal government. But that is something that if we did have to do an audit, if we use our auditor, that we could use these funds to pay for that. From a staff standpoint, and this is where I want to talk to the council a little bit, that we have guidance, but it's still murky. We've been talking to both the county, and I've been talking to other cities within in Chisago County, and we're all leading with a little bit of trepidation and waiting more for June to really discuss more what some of these funds we can do. The one thing that we want to identify right away is revenue loss in 2020, and that things that we talked about last night, we saw in our audit analysis that our building department was under, largely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of our police department revenues were down and our admin revenues were down in 2020. We could potentially look at water delivery or infrastructure projects with some of these dollars. We can look at broadband. One thing that the county is actually just having a similar discussion right now tonight on this. And one thing that it looks like they have identified is they will be doing significant work with some of their dollars for broadband and offering assistance to cities and possibly even matching grants if there's improvements that we look to do. Business loans, last time the Chisago County HRA EDA ran this in conjunction with the county. It doesn't sound at this point like they will be doing much of this, largely because the state will be having funding that comes out in July, and they're going to be shifting their interest elsewhere. We have looked also at some potential public safety items to see eligibility on that. Like I said, once again, we're waiting for guidance. Affordable housing may be an option on this as well. Recently, the Chisago County HRA EDA did create a housing trust fund. And initially, there is some discussion at the county that they might be putting some dollars into that to use for housing that cities may take on. And also, like I said, once again, payroll expenses. We are going to continue to collaborate with local cities and our counties to see if there's things where we can work together to try to spend these dollars together. But and then, of course, we want feedback from the council as priority items that you see on this. And we'll certainly, as we go through this, we'll provide you with updated guidance as we receive it, and then a little more focused on potential projects or potential ways that we can give this, utilize this money to help the community. So that's really all we have for tonight. Next steps, we'll be waiting for that clarification, like I said, from Minnesota Management Budget. How much will the city receive? When will we receive it? And then the League of Minnesota Cities came out today that will be asking the council to pass a resolution at as soon as your next meeting, giving staff to take the authority to move forward. There are some different things as far as providing our DUNS number, our SWIFT number to actually have access to those funds. That's really the update tonight. If council has any questions about priorities, about any other questions in regards to the funds of what we know so far, I'm happy to stand for those. Like I said, we met with staff this morning to kind of go over some potentials on this, but really we want to make sure that we have a good understanding of the guidance and its full announcement before we take a lot of steps moving forward.
Okay, council, let's do this because it's getting late. If you want to unmute and raise your hand and state your name, if you have any questions, we can get through them pretty quickly.
Linda got a question, a couple of them. On the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, would we have to disperse those funds before 2024?
Correct. All the funds would have to be, if they were part of the actual American Rescue Plan dollars, you are correct. They would have to be dispersed.
Because I could see having that in lieu of a TIF. In lieu of offering a TIF was one idea. The other idea was, and you may think this slightly off the wall, how much does a water treatment plant to get the radium out of the water cost?
Probably around $10 million.
Oh, well, forget that idea. I thought, if we had some found money and if it didn't cost less than $10 million.
Yeah, but I mean, if there were projects, I know that continue the council of that last radium report, we continue to watch that and analyze it. And if, we'll try to obviously prioritize that as we feel necessary, and engineering's been keeping an eye on it. We're hopeful that that won't come to fruition here for quite a few more years. And right now it is trending back down, but if it was something that the council wanted to look at as far as, it's a piece of it or a component of it, if it was a high priority, we probably think that we might have other projects that might be a higher priority than that, but it's a valid thought because it would be eligible.
Yeah, because I mean, if we had to do it eventually, if we had some found money, it wouldn't be a bad idea.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll probably look at for multiple projects, that if we have them on our CIP or on our future radar, that's what we'll be try to evaluate and give council some different options when we get the full clarification on uses.
Okay.
Is there anybody else that has a question? Doesn't look like it. All right, Mr. Linwood, we can then proceed to number 3. And number 3 is to consider the diversity, equity, and inclusion training program.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. This is a follow-up conversation from the City Council work session back in April, at the end of April. At that work session, the council reviewed several different trainers for a diversity, equity, inclusion training for the City Council. And staff has followed up with the preferred trainer from that list to identify a condensed foundational training that really sets the city up to identify both the conversation and tools that the city can use moving forward to implement programs and projects in the city to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. What's presented to you in your packet is a 2-session series through Asperza Consulting. Cardina Asperza is currently the Equity and Inclusion Director at the Office of the Inspector General at the Minnesota Department of Human Services. The program that she's presenting has 2 pieces to it, 2 different trainings, and she proposes to have approximately 4 to 5 weeks between those trainings to allow time for participants to reflect and think about how the training applies to our specific city. This program is the start of a conversation. If the council is interested in continuing this conversation after those 2 sessions, that's absolutely a possibility. Or if the council is interested in moving the conversation in a different direction, that's also something that can be discussed. So this is the start of the conversation, and what we're trying to get feedback on is if what's presented fits what the council was hoping to see, if there's any changes either that the council would like to add back in or remove from the proposal.
All right, thank you. I'll go around the room. Member Luger.
I like it. I like what I see, staff's recommendation. I would like to move forward with it. I do have a follow-up question, and I know this based on some of the work that educators are doing across a lot of metro school districts. It's kind of an ongoing process, and I'm wondering if there's what opportunities, and this might be cart before the horse. I certainly don't want to derail anything, but I'm wondering if there are also like any kind of like follow-up session spread out, not looking for something like every month, looking for something that just kind of keeps this kind of at the forefront of the discussion, and kind of what we as a council have talked about for some of the city's goals.
Yes, so in the previous proposal, there was an additional session in the training that was kind of a workshop to identify specific steps for the council. That was removed from this specific proposal. That is something that the council can, if there's interest in adding that specifically back in, or if the council wants to revisit that conversation after the conclusion of the 2 sessions.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Member Yeager?
Well, I do have some concerns with this. I would like to see it open to, well, I'd like to see the training broadened to include age discrimination, gender, sexual orientation. But even what we would call the legal forms of discrimination that the government hasn't specifically banned, but discrimination between people from other regions of the country, for having a difference of opinion, for having a different political philosophy, because you also need to talk about that. I think staff should be trained as well, and all the boards and commissioners, but staff especially, because when a person comes to Wyoming, you're not talking to the council at the first contact. You're calling City Hall and talking to staff, and that needs to happen. I am concerned about the length of the training, 2-hour sessions and independent study in between. I don't know how many staff members or even board and commissioners would be open to or have the time to do to complete the requirements.
In terms of the spectrum of what the training covers, the specific training that is offered does specifically go through what's referred to as 8 level or dimensions of diversity to try and capture some of that breadth that you're talking about. In terms of length, that's absolutely something that the council can discuss. However, in trying to pare down the conversation from the 4 sessions to the 2, really the paradigm of the 2 sessions, the first is looking at diversity dimensions that everyone has within themselves, and then the second session looks more at how the group is constructed and what different aspects of diversity, dimensions of diversity exist within the groups that we're operating in.
All right, any other questions or comments, Linda?
No.
Okay, thank you. Member Onstead?
I'm looking forward to the training.
All right, thank you. Member Schilling?
It's not fair, Member Onstead. You've already been through it like I have. No, there was only one thing I was going to ask in light of what Claire had stated as well. You know, we go through this stuff as a council and as a staff. I really, I don't disagree with Linda's statement on, you know, staff and other boards and commissions, but I think us as council, I think we should move ourselves through it first before we start pushing everything else, because there might be differences of opinions. And the other question I had, or not really a question, but kind of add off of it, was, are we allowed to get a detailed PowerPoint of this presentation or this training? Because then we can refer to it in the future as well when we're trying to do our goals and sessions.
Are you referring to a copy of the materials after the
Yeah,
training?
like after we do the training, are we allowed to have that something we can hang on to as a reference material so we can use it further? You know, if it's something that, you know, we kind of remember and go, oh, hey, what were we talking about? That type of thing is what I was kind of asking. So
I can absolutely reach out to the consultant to see if that's an opportunity.
okay, and that was all I had for questions.
All right, thank you. I have a couple. I am a little concerned about the price. So if I'm reading this correctly, is it $1,400 total? If
In
it's
total, correct.
right, $1,400. Okay.
And to clarify, that is for virtual training. I did inquire if there was an opportunity for an in-person training. It would add $100 a session if that's something the council's interested in.
So it'd be $1,600
for an in-person training, correct?
in-person training. Okay. And then I am concerned about the length of time. This is very important to have this training. I just, as my concern is this, we tend to right now, I don't know when we're going to do this, try to fit it in with those time frames. What I'm worried about is now we're in budget session and there's how many meetings, and then we're working through the facilities, and we're working through franchise fees and all that kind of stuff. So in my mind, I'm just trying to figure out how we fit in 2 more meetings, 2 hours each on top of our work sessions and stuff. So those are my concerns. I think I wish it was cheaper. I don't want to devalue how important this is. I just have to wonder if there's something out there that's not quite as expensive, if I'm being totally honest with that. And maybe a little less time. And then the other thing is when do we find when this year? Is it this year, or do we do it January of next year? Like, what is our time frame that our council is looking at to get this in? So, and feel free to unmute and say when everybody's kind of thinking we could fit it in. So I'm fine with that too. Just state who you are. So if anybody wants to jump in on that time frame.
After this week, I want to do it next year. There's been too many meetings.
I think this is, what is it, our 5th or 6th, or
Fifth meeting this week. No, I tend to agree as well, but the price was always a concern for me. But again, I'm not, just like you're stating, I'm not trying to devalue it in any way, shape, or form. But as a person that's been through a few of these, you know, to me, it's hard just because I have a hard enough time with the meetings now. But again, I'm not saying I can't or any of that type of thing. But I would like to, if we were going to move forward with it, I would like to schedule it in a time of the year when we are typically 1 to 2 meetings a month. You know, when we're not trying to cram budget through. But when is that? Is that January, or is that December, or is that, you know? And I'm going to be honest, I think every month that I've been on council for the last couple of years, we're busy. We're busy all the time. So, you know, I guess I don't know. I don't have an answer. I'm going to stop talking.
I think when you said that, Dennis, I think it's kind of funny because we all had that same expression on our face, like, don't know what month that is. It just,
yeah, you all did. You all looked at me like, really?
right. So I don't know. I mean, anybody else want to kind of jump in on the time of year and suggest time of year?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm in favor of doing this like yesterday. I think that if we are committed to inclusion and if we are committed to equity, then we have an imperative to move on this as soon as possible, because it's, you know, this is something that's important. So I also feel like it's a worthy investment of our time, and that we are not going to understand the material. We are not going to learn anything until we actually start the process. And I get it. Like, I know I'm swamped right now between, you know, meetings here and everything else. I still feel like this, like the value of this is, you know, trumps kind of the time limitations. And I think we did look at, I think if I recall correctly, when we talked about this, there were a couple of options of, like, we talked about kind of spacing it out. And then there was a conversation of, do we want to space out and make them shorter and have more meetings, or do we want to do fewer meetings and chunk it together? And so, I mean, I think it's either way, I think we end up with the same thing, and that's either more or longer meetings. But I do feel like there is a value to this, and then it's a priority.
Dennis.
On Claire's note, I have one question, because we opened things up this year, I'm going to be taking a few little mini vacations this year. So my question is if it's on a day that one of us cannot attend, can we still attend it at a different time, or do we have to all be in it? That's my other concern. That specific day, I mean, because it is virtual, that's why I'm asking. So
the date has not been set as of yet for when the training specifically is happening. Like I mentioned, the training was initially proposed as a virtual training. If the council wanted to do an in-person training, that's an option. It will be recorded since it does have to be posted as a public meeting for the council. So it will be able to be reviewed if a council member is not able to attend. Is there anything you would add to that, Administrator Linwood?
Ms. Dumas, no, I think you're correct. I mean, if with a consultant like this, I mean, I think it's like any other trainings we've ever done. We'll work with the council to identify a date, and you know, if we're on the surface that looks like a good one, we're certainly hopeful that everyone can attend, whether it's in person or virtual. And if something comes up, or you know, I would hopefully, you know, if there's plan schedules, vacations, hopefully everyone knows going into it. And if something happens, like any meeting, I know that doesn't happen often, but I suppose something, you know, something could come up with somebody, hopefully nothing an emergency, but we do our best, and we'll bring some dates to the council as far as, you know, it'd probably be on a Wednesday or a Thursday. That's usually when we do kind of work sessions or these items, and, you know, look at maybe some moments and, you know, in the upcoming, if it's, whether it's June or July, you know, I know we have another budget work session at the beginning of June, but maybe between that and the 4th of July, and then we have another budget work session not till the end of July. So maybe there's some opportunity between that middle of June and then maybe more that beginning of July to space those out, so we can look at proposing some dates and talking. I think obviously Assistant City Administrator Dumas would need to check availability with that trainer, but like anything we do, we can work with the council to find dates that hopefully will work with all.
Okay, so that was kind of my question. Thank you, Mr. Linwood, for answering it. If we're gonna throw out dates and then we can all go yes, no, yes, no. I have everything planned for my entire summer already. So as long as there's dates proposed, I can answer yes or no at that time. So thank you both very much.
I do have a question. You said this will be recorded and reviewed. So is this going to be posted on YouTube?
It could be reviewed, I believe Ms. Dumas said, as any of our meetings can be reviewed, the recorded ones. You know, it's normal that we put our work sessions. This isn't per se a work session, it's a training. I think that's, we have to record it since there is a quorum. I think that's under the council's discretion if they want it posted or not posted. In regards to work sessions, most of our work sessions we have been posting. Formally, we were not you know, posting some of the prior, we were not always posting our recorded in council before the pandemic on the website. So, but we do have to, if there is a quorum, we have to record it for the record, correct?
Okay, my concern is, I mean, this gets into some sensitive material. I really wouldn't feel comfortable speaking of on such topics where a member of the press or the public could come in later, watch the recording, and find myself trashed on social media or print media or Twin Cities media.
If the council is interested in expanding the training to include staff or boards and commission members to space it out so that there wouldn't be a quorum, that could be an option. However, with just the proposal of doing a council training, it does have to be recorded as a part of that open meeting law.
And if I could weigh in on it just for a minute, before you decide if you want to expand it into staff or not. By post standards and rules, we have been and continue to, in the police department, engage in diversity, equity, and implicit bias training annually as a post mandate. I believe some of those are going to be changed or adapted as part of the police reform stuff that's coming out. So I certainly don't want to have my staff duplicate or even triplicate the training at the cost of the city for a couple different reasons. Number one, the cost of the training by having to expand it to multiple training sessions, but equally as important, cost of bringing all of them back in on overtime when we're already providing that training to them and have been for years.
All right. Further questions or comments? All right, so it looks to me like the next step is to bring forward dates, but I am gonna bring forward dates. I don't know where else to go from there. I will say this. I'm going to say this for record. Again, it's very important we do this 2 hours each session and time in between. It is a lot. We're already a lot of meetings, but it is important. So we're treading lightly on that. And I totally understand where Claire's going with this, but I don't mean but, because that means it negates all that. It's just, it would be nice if there was some training that was maybe a little less time. So, and I know you've already done your due diligence on that. So it looks like the next step forward is actually looking at some dates. So at our next council meeting, I think we'll need to bring this forward. If everybody has their calendars ready, that would be huge. And then Mr. Linwood, also what we have coming for work sessions and that sort of thing too would be great. So we can figure it out. All right. I believe that is it, unless anybody has any questions or comments. Doesn't look that way unless anybody wants to stay on longer. It's only 8:11. No? Okay. All right. So with that, I will adjourn this work session meeting at 8:12 p.m. I hope everybody has a great weekend and we'll see you all soon. So thank you. Bye.